So those two bookends are really advantageous, and it's part of the overall business model that we've created in that if we're in the consulting phase and we know we're going to be in the management phase, we have a very vested interest in giving the best possible consult because we're going to have to put our money where our mouth is at some point.
This episode of the Attraction Pros podcast is brought to you by our friend Eric Fluet at Get It Done Marketing.
With 30 years of experience in the attractions industry, Get It Done Marketing offers freelance marketing insight, strategy, and execution at a fraction of the cost of a full-time hire.
Partnering with over 30 parks and resorts, from family water parks to large multi-location organizations, Get It Done Marketing fills leadership voids on property, and corporate marketing teams, assists with resource allocation, and supports emerging marketing professionals.
Learn more at getitdonemarketing.com. Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges facing the attractions industry today.
We chat with some of the top leaders in the field and provide resources that will help develop your career in this great industry.
I am Josh Liebman. I am obsessed with the guest experience and helping attractions make that their top priority for success.
And I'm Matt Heller. I am passionate about organizational effectiveness, leadership development, and employee engagement.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and get ready for the Attraction Pros podcast. Hey, Matt, how's it going?
It's going fantastically. Josh, how are you?
I'm doing well, and I will once again point out you make it an adverb whenever I ask, but it's always an adjective when you ask. I don't have that much data to support this, but I'm coming up with this theory here. Anyway,
we might have a few episodes to go back and listen to, but yeah, go ahead.
There's a few hundred.
Yes.
We have no idea what we're doing for episode 400, by the way, but welcome to episode 398. Hopefully we'll figure it out by the time it goes live. But question for you.
Yes.
Have you ever been able to visualize something that doesn't exist?
That's one of the hardest things for me to do, especially when it comes to paint. I'm sure you've painted things in your home.
We've recorded multiple episodes.
That's true. That's true. Yes, I have a hard time visualizing things that aren't there. This is going to sound horrible unless I have a really good vision about it. Like, unless I have thought of it and came up with an idea, or this is like in my mind what I want it to be, it's easier than if I'm trying to visualize something that's not there that somebody else is trying to explain or trying to get me to think of.
So like when my wife gives me two paint samples and they're very similar and they're like 1 square inch, and she's like, all right, which do you think the wall should be? I won't know it until the entire wall is covered in that color. Is that kind of what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. Exactly what I'm saying. Yes.
So we're aligned there, at least.
We are.
The reason I ask is because our guest today is Brian Stovall. He's the founder and managing partner at Icon Leisure Services. And that is a huge pillar of what they do, is helping engineers and architects design facilities, attraction-based facilities, very much through the lens of the operator, to be able to identify areas that they know that they need as the operator that might not necessarily go into a general cadence of engineering and architecture.
What I really appreciate about what he said about this was, so many times, and I know I've experienced this in places that I've worked, is that you will get into a situation where you have to make major modifications to a building, a wall, a structure, because the operator or the attendant or the employee, or even in some cases the guest, that person, that human being, wasn't thought of in the design and build process in the first place. So now you've got to go and have a major reconstruction. And he likes to say, we can help you make those adjustments with pen and paper, not with bulldozers and backhoes.
Isn't it nice when people are thought of when designing a facility that is meant for people, right?
Yes, yes, it is.
And Brian's been in the industry for over 30 years, and we got to hear just lessons from that from the beginning. He walks us through his whole career story, and we certainly won't steal his thunder from that, but just know that there's a lot of great lessons shared in this interview.
And one of them is when he got well, when he says he received sort of an honorary MBA from certain experiences that he got, and I think we can all relate to that, the education that you get in this industry. So, is it time to open up those textbooks and hear about the lessons from Brian?
As long as we can visualize what this interview might look like. Hey, Brian, welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast. We're really excited to have you today. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Josh? Thanks for having me.
Doing really well, and thank you so much for joining us. So, to jump into this, Brian, tell us about yourself. Tell us about your background and your career.
Oh man, it's been an interesting career. It's been an interesting background, I guess. I grew up in Central Texas. Started with Schlitterbahn when I was picking up tubes and trash until my 16th birthday, and then on my 16th birthday, I was sitting on a lifeguard stand. And kind of never looked back, I guess. I've stayed with attractions in the general sense my entire career. Um, Stayed with Schlitterbahn through high school and college. Interestingly, and I'll come back around to it, when I was not working Schlitterbahn's or summer in Schlitterbahn, I was working in the live event space in my university. So production, light, sound, staging, things like that. And then in the summers, go back to Schlitterbahn, all while I was getting a degree in resource and environmental management. So interesting combination there. But uh, there's a little foreshadowing there. We'll get to that later. But after Schlitterbahn, got recruited to go out to San Diego with the team to build a water park down there, which is still in operation. From there, this big giant amphitheater opened up next to us it was by a group called Universal. And so as the operations manager over at the park, I was tasked with liaising with the amphitheater. And because I grew up in, live performances and live entertainment, I was able to speak to them kind of in their language, in the parlance of that industry. And through the course of it, got to know this one guy who was kind of just walking around and pointing and looking at, blueprints and things like that. And towards the end of it, and I'm kind of fast forwarding the end of the build process, he asked me for a resume, and I said, "Wow, I really am honored that you would ask me, but I enjoy operating at least then, just also foreshadowing. I enjoy operating these things more than building them. So, I appreciate it. But he goes, well, what do you think I do? I'm not in construction. I was like, really? I thought you were the GC. And he said, no, I'm the senior vice president of Universal. I said, oh, well, okay, let me go get the resume, right? And so we did that and got recruited to into the amphitheater world and started doing live entertainment and big music. My first post was a 30,000 capacity amphitheater in Austin, Texas. Um, did that for a couple of years, and then they transferred me to Denver and did shows up there. Started working there was a merger, or I guess an acquisition of Universal Music with House of Blues, and so I started working with House of Blues. And they bounced me around a little bit, back to Austin and then to Dallas, and um, then went over to South Padre Island to help Schlitterbahn build the South Padre Island Schlitterbahn. And while we were there, they wanted me to help them produce the spring break show. So we did about 14 days of live music with, artists. I'm dating myself here now, but like Run DMC and Vanilla Ice and, things like that. They're solid spring break choices of the time. So we had a lot of fun. Then I bounced back into the concert world, and I stayed in the concert world and got recruited to go up to Las Vegas to manage the House of Blues at Mandalay Bay, which I joke with people that was my MBA in hospitality on the strip of Las Vegas. Uh, but continued to kind of work in that entertainment space and always thought those two roads would diverge, with the water parks and the amphitheaters and the concerts and all that. And when I was in Nashville working with Ryman, got an opportunity to perhaps make those two worlds converge. That was kind of the beginnings of what would become Icon Leisure. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
I feel like there's a lot to unpack there, Brian, with what you just shared, especially from someone who also has a background in sound and lighting.
Yep.
And I didn't know that about you, so that's really cool. But I'm curious, like what what do you take from both worlds that come together now? Maybe this is what comes together in Icon, or just even in your kind of approach to dealing with clients or, creating events and things like that, because you now have obviously both sides. You've got the technical side, you've got the story side, you've got the client side. So how do those all kind of converge for you?
Yeah, so part of the services that we offer are what I've called operational design consulting. And as we go through the kind of the clients that we have and are working with currently, a lot of them are big kind of multi-use developments that are anchored by either an aquatic feature or a theme park type fixture or an entertainment fixture or all of them, right? But it's a la, Disney Springs or something like that, where they have a bunch of different things with retail, dining, entertainment, various attractions, hotel, hospitality, all that being developed on one property. So having been in those worlds, right? And obviously the House of Blues in Vegas also has a 700 seat restaurant in it. So um, being able to speak intelligently to not only food and beverage in the concessions world of the traditional part, but also in a dining type of world, being able to understand the programmatic functions of a kitchen, of a commercial restaurant. It's funny that you said that you started with lights and sound because my first gig was behind a soundboard. That's why I started. And then I went to lights and then I went to production management and ultimately to general management of arenas. But um, having been in those worlds and in the big entertainment world, but as you know, with like arenas or even to a lesser degree performing arts centers and amphitheaters, they offer a myriad of entertainment opportunities. So attractions fits very well into those things, right? We kind of joke sometimes with our clients, tongue in cheek, that if you sell tickets to it or you charge an admission or there's a fee associated with it, we can operate it. So I think my business partners and I kind of put together one time just generally all the things that we've done over the course of our 30-year career, and we've sold about 50 million tickets of different places and different things. So that's a lot. Um, so I always thought the two worlds would diverge, right? I couldn't see how to put restaurants and concerts together with a water park, but then these multi-use facilities started coming in, and we're seeing all these components in consideration into one development. So to be able to speak intelligently to multiple facets has definitely been advantageous and kind of separated us from others that are in the same space.
Well, I think they're all very much integrated together as well. Of course, they've got their own, nuances on the peripheral. The performing arts venue has got a lot of technical components that maybe the water park does not have, but I think the Venn diagram overlap is probably pretty significant.
Absolutely.
Can we go a little deeper into operational design consulting, and if we can unpack what that looks like?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked that, Josh, because it's somewhat of a new concept. Operators by and large of any of the facilities that we just mentioned, whether it's water park, theme park, resort, concert venue, anything, typically we will be engaged when the facility is built and we got to figure it out. And operators typically wear on their sleeve like a badge of honor that we can just do just that. We'll figure it out, right? Even to the oldest adage out there of the show must go on. So we, give us duct tape and baling wire and we'll get doors open, right? Um, so I did that for a long time in about 12 different cities across the United States and various venues. And I started thinking every single venue that I go to, whether it's newly built or it's been working for a while, always tends to shave off a significant portion of CapEx to retro the building into making it more operationally efficient, right? Whether it's putting in a wall or taking out a wall or putting in a ramp or, some sort of manipulation of the overall structure or the overall flow, right? So I thought, how can we do this differently? And so the idea was, well, let's start when we can do it with a pencil and eraser rather than a jackhammer and a pardon our dust sign. So we go, I kind of thought, let's get in front of the architects and the engineers and the developers and the owners early in the process so that we can work collaboratively with them, uh, and offer that insight, offer the insight of looking through an experienced operator's lens. Because I have a tremendous amount of respect for architects and engineers, and I do, and even developers. But I've not yet met one that sticks around and actually works at the facility that they've built, right? So it's just a different type of thought process and a different lens of having boots on the ground and understanding how these facilities work and how the guests and staff interact with them versus the drawings and the code compliance and the aesthetics and things like that. So I'll tell you that I was sweating. I can remember. I was like, why am I so hot? Why am I sweating before I walked into my first client boardroom with a big, bank of architects, engineers, developers, all these people? Because I always, and still today think, man, they are so much smarter than me. I don't know how I'm going to contribute to this, but here we go, right? And it ended up being really good. They actually appreciated it, or at least they expressed their appreciation. And I guess they continue to do so because now we are, official subconsultants of several architectural and engineering firms around the country. And they bring us in for operational consult on various designs of various projects now. So it's finally starting to gain some legs, and they're starting to understand the benefits of it. One of the first questions that I got from a developer was, "I don't need you right now. I don't have anything to operate. You're an operator." It's like, well, let me help you understand the advantage of putting an operator in you know, before we get to the final product. So, does that answer your question? I don't know if I danced around it or not, but the operational design consulting, right? So basically, architects would and would will create blueprints, and then based on the vision of the overall facility or property development, we'll go in and make little notes on the facility like, hey, let's not put a 90-degree turn on this loading dock because that's going to be problematic for getting stuff in. One of the recent projects I did had the walk-in freezers and refrigerators on the opposite side of the kitchen from the loading dock. And so every time you get a product delivered, you'd have to go through the entire kitchen with a delivery to be able to stock it. And that will disrupt the flow of the kitchen and ultimately create a longer ticket time, if not errors in the recipes that would impact the guest service, right? Um, Things like a lot of times these buildings are, especially on the multi-use development, they're built with all four sides of the building client facing, if you will. And so there's always a challenge of, well, where do we put the trash? Where do we take out the trash? I've got a client right now as well that's in a big development, and he's, the very first conversation that we started in after we were engaged, he said, well, just on a overview real quick, can you think of anything that we could, add or take away from or anything like that? And I said, how do you get product in and trash out? And they hadn't designed any docks or any trash cans or any of those kind of things that are not sexy, but they'll make or break your business, right? So those are some examples of operational design efficiency. Some of the other ones are guest journey, right? So we'll walk into and taking some of the lessons learned over the years in the industry. We don't want the guests to be able to see the entire park as soon as they walk in the guest. We want the sense of discovery and the sense of, hey, what's around that corner? And by that, we'll extend the magic quotient that we all know of dwell time or length of stay, right? So all those things are taken into account while we look through that. And then it applies to the buildings, the way the buildings are arranged, the way people face the sun or not, shade structures, the MEP runs throughout the facility and ease of access of those by the maintenance staff, and all those kind of things go into it. So
Well, I think you explained it in my perspective perfectly, because I'm thinking back to all the places that I'm thinking, boy, we could have used someone like you when, places that I've worked have been designed, and, shade structures and just, ease of operation for someone that's actually doing it. Or when someone would say, who designed this? Like whoever
right.
designed this was not thinking about the end user. But I'm also curious, because you mentioned both guests and employees, right? You mentioned the kitchen, you mentioned the guest journey. I'm curious if there's ever times when those two experiences kind of converge, I guess, or that you look at those and say, well, there's almost a compromise between what has to happen for the team member versus the guest, and if those two things don't line up, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, Matt. And I'll take it a step further. We also look at vendor experience as well as first responder experience. So as we go through all of those, we all know in the industry that an emergency situation isn't a question of if, it's a question of when. So we need to be prepared for it. And every facility out there, I hope, has an emergency action plan of some sort and a plan to manage those types of situations. But we take that into account in the design as well. Not only do we do that, but after we get to a certain percentage of completion, we start including the local first responder authorities to get their input in, also to get their buy-in in. So yes, there are always compromises that have to be made, right? Sometimes we impact the guest experience to make a better staff experience or vice versa. But having been staff, as we all have, I'm very keen to make that staff experience, especially in today's world of labor and everything that goes into getting staff. I want to make that staff as great as possible. And indeed, I judge our success by how happy, for lack of a better word, supported, ease of operation it is for the staff, and create a kind of a team and a group and a unit that are happy to be there. My biggest success is having staff members that have been there for years and years and years and are happy to be there for years and years and years. And most of that has to do with making sure that the staff are knowledgeable at or trained to what they're doing, give them the tools that they need to do the job, and then giving them the space that it takes to get the job done. So if you cram six people into a 10 by 10 office and expect them to have a good day, that's a tall ask. So we try to look at both of those things, and of course, there's always compromises one way or another, but we try to balance it as much as we can.
Mhm.
I
So
just want to say, totally a topic that I love geeking out on. So I'm really excited, just like even like what other questions are kind of coming to mind. And even just you talking about all the different, stakeholders that, you're thinking about in mind, the guest, the employee, the vendor, first responder. I remember back in college, I had notebooks and notebooks full of my just dream theme park resort that I had been just imagining in my head. Here's
right.
the ride, here's the lands, and here's the theming. And then I looked at it one day and was like, well, wait a second, how would an ambulance get over here? And I was doing it with pencil and erasal. So even just with my just imagination of just like, well, there needs to be the first responder entrance to get into this part of the area. Can't have them go over this type of bridge here. A vehicle can't go over that.
That's
I
it.
so kind of where kind of my question is this is how do you visualize what doesn't exist? And I remember a specific example that I was in a real theme park, not one that I dreamt up on, on in paper and pencil, but I being, the park was under construction, talking to the architects, and they said, here's the blueprints. Now, Josh, tell us where you need power. And I just remember thinking, I'm not going to know where I need power until I'm standing in the building and we're operating. And
Right.
I had been operating for several years at that point. And so even with the lens of the operator, if it doesn't exist, how do you really visualize it?
Man, that is a great question, Josh. And I'll tell you that it's a skill set that some have and that some don't. And by don't, I mean they just haven't exercised it enough or thought differently enough to utilize it. But just like all of us, some are more creative, some are more analytical, things like that. So it's a different type of skill set. Um, and you basically have to mentally walk through the park. That's the best way I can describe it to you is try to figure out every eventuality, which is hard, right? It's almost impossible. But the ones that the ones that you can, and think, hey, I'm probably going to need a water spigot here, or I'm probably going to need a drain here, or I'm probably going to need power here, or it would be great if I did have power here because this certain space I want to make multifunctional, and on one day I want it to function like this, on another day I want it to function like this. So the best way I can describe it is that 30 years of experience comes back in and I mentally walk through the facility and basically apply all the lessons learned over that experience and think, hey, this is what we need here. And this, I know this doesn't work here. But, I guess the bigger part about it, Josh, is that in that development cycle, we're tasked with doing things like that but I've been fortunate enough to not have to do it all on my own, meaning I'll have ideas and I'll throw them out, but there's a design team that we can bounce ideas off of. And hey, we may need this here. And somebody else would say, well, that won't work because of this, but maybe we could do it around this way. And we kind of work together as a team to massage it and check as many of the boxes of each of our focus as possible and understand the ones that we haven't checked and try to work through solutions for that, maybe in a different part of the park or maybe changing the programming vision up a little bit. But it's not just me. It's the whole design team that works together to create these projects. I just offer a certain perspective.
And I would imagine, just like you talked about the compromises you make between the staff and the team members, there's also that budget consideration, right? So in Josh's example, where do you want power? Everywhere. Put it everywhere, but you can't really do that from a budgetary standpoint. So I guess it's relying on your experience and those designers' experiences to really say, okay, I'm going to make my best educated guess, or if I can think through where I'm going to need specific utilities, then putting them in the best place possible. So at least you're not without, or you're not overdoing it too much. So I would imagine that's another consideration as well.
It is, and a lot of it has to do with the form following the function, right? So we start to program the space and we figure out where we want the activations, whatever that may be, whether it's a food and beverage outlet or a cabana that has a ceiling fan and a TV in it, or, whatever it may be, a concert venue, and then say, okay, well, I know we want to do concert venue here. We've gotten that sign off from the ownership. So we know we're going to need to put the appropriate amount of power in here for the show that we're trying to do. So that's an X on the map, right? And then we go through the whole thing after we figured out the programmatic features, and that helps to kind of back into that a little bit instead of the other way around. So
And then I'm curious, and following through the process of being there in the design phase and then through construction and then seeing it in real life, when you're walking through a property that has now been built, it's been developed, and you've been part of that process, what are the things that you're looking for?
well, there's three different columns of business, as I like to say, within Icon Leisure. And the first we've been discussing, which is the operational design consulting. That will start with the concept drawings, or how I've learned to call them bubble drawings, just kind of general massing ideas of where things go, and all the way through the design drawings, the schematics, into construction drawings, which ultimately get published to the GC to start the process of building, right? That's our first column of business. The second column of business is when it's being constructed. And I say kind of tongue in cheek that while the project's being constructed, we're building the infrastructure, meaning, we're starting to source, identify, and hire and train the staff from the general manager all the way to the line level staff. We're writing SOPs. We're identifying vendor needs, whether it's, food and beverage or landscaping or trash services or any of those types of things, and negotiating those contracts and hiring those vendors. We're writing emergency action plans, getting them vetted with local first responder authorities, things like that. As the facility is being constructed, we're doing that kind of behind the scenes, most of the time in a temporary offsite office somewhere, working into that. We'll bring that all the way to the third column of the business, and that is the day-to-day ongoing management of the facility. So those two bookends are really advantageous, and it's part of the overall business model that we've created, in that if we're in the consulting phase and we know we're going to be in the management phase, we have a very vested interest in giving the best possible consult, because we're going to have to put our money where our mouth is at some point. And my management structure is such that there's a base fee, a minimal base fee, but it's very performance driven. So there's performance incentives on the management fee to do better than the budget, right? The approved budget. If you're in the management side, if we've gone through the process and you're the manager that's on the ground and you're looking back, well, now you've been part of the team that understands where all the MEPs are buried. It understands why the things are the way that they are, and the whole vision and the anticipation of how the park is going to function. Now, that would never be so arrogant to say that it's going to work perfectly. It's not ever going to work perfectly. There's always going to have to be kind of massages made and things like that from the management on the ground. But the concept is that the management on the ground will have a a head start, if you will, or be able to be more efficient because they understand the process by which we've gotten to the point of opening the doors. So that's kind of the whole business model that we're working from.
And I'm sure that there's differences in terms of the length of time that each one of those takes. But on average, when you are brought into a project to the time that you are, for example, starting that kind of ongoing sustainable management practice, is there sort of a range or a window of time that those projects takes, just to kind of give us an idea of how long this actually takes to come to life?
Man, there's so many variables to that question, Matt. It's really hard to answer you. I would say minimum of a year and a half to 2 years, and as far as 5 years from
Hmm.
start to finish. And that has to do with the intricacies of the development, right? We've done everything from develop a small water park type of a resort facility that has food and beverage and lounge space next to a resort hotel. And then we're, in process right now of a multi-use development that's spread over 500 acres that has everything from retail dining, entertainment, surf pools, lagoons, hard ride attractions, 2,400 single family homes, 1,800 multifamily homes. That one's going to take a little longer.
Yeah.
So, that you throw in the politics and financing on those, and who knows where it's going to go. So, but generally, to answer your question, between a year and a half to 5 years, we've seen projects take. So,
So, Brian, you mentioned you've been in the business a few years. I think you said about 30 plus years or so. Curious as far as what changes you've seen throughout the industry that have driven design changes or considerations overall.
yeah, well, obviously technology, right? As technology evolves, so do not only the developments, but also the appetite of the people coming to the developments, the ability to work with staff, and all the things technology has. So I won't go too far into that, but I think one of the things that I'm seeing currently is I won't say a departure from the traditional facility or park. But I will say that I'm seeing more and more big multi-use type developments coming in where there's different elements of different things, right? So, the lagoon technology that's come up, the surf technology that's come up, a lot of that is creating attraction-based real estate development. And then they'll put multifamily around it, they'll put retail, residential over retail type of buildings in it. A lot of your live, work, play type stuff, especially with the direction that work from home is going and things like that. So most of our current projects, both working on now as well as in the pipeline from a proposal standpoint, is on these big multi-use developments that have multiple different attractions, hard rides, water rides, entertainment like amphitheaters or performing arts centers attached to them. So just the concentration of a diversification of attractions, maybe the most succinct way to say that, rather than somebody going and building, a 20-acre little water park that has, the traditional water park elements, And I honestly haven't seen a lot of big theme parks coming up. So there's a couple, but not a whole lot.
Yeah.
But so that's kind of where I've started seeing things start to take on that direction, I guess.
And would you say, because I know a lot of your work has to do with aquatics type facilities or something that has to do with water, is that something that, based on kind of what you're seeing, is in demand that much from the consumer? Like, hey, we can't put in a big roller coaster in this multi-use area, but we can put a splash pad or we can put a water feature or something like that. So is it just that the water features are that much more accessible?
I think that has something to do with it, Matt. I remember back, I'll just say generally back in the day, that nebulous time, when water parks were starting to come out in the late 80s, and people were saying, we could put an entire water park in for the price of a good, a big roller coaster. And so the water parks were emerging, right? Now I think it's a diversification of interests that are bringing those things about, but also just people's propensity to want to be by the water. If you look at where most people vacation, it involves a body of water somewhere. And so people have an affinity, and I'm speaking generally, I know, but generally people have an affinity towards being either in or next to the water. Obviously, the price of real estate on coasts are, a lot more expensive than off the coast or off the beach. So we're starting to identify that, and to kind of echo back to Josh's question, the technology has caught up to be able to, use one of the lines from the guy from my home state. We can build oceanfront property in Arizona now, so. Um, I think the water element is just a nice amenity that's being put in. But, the leisure element, we do a lot of water stuff. We do a lot of, lagoon and surf stuff and traditional water park stuff. But we also work with, resort amenities and things like that. We spoke with, for example, the Fort Worth stockyards that had no water in them, but they were interested in us helping them understand the placemaking, the guest experience, how food and beverage could integrate into the overall guest experience, how we could maximize ancillary revenue from food and beverage, tick points through the course of the whole guest journey. So things like that are beginning to catch on that are applicable, and with the entertainment space as well. And how do we put a water ride in with a amphitheater? Well, what we've been telling people and what people are catching on to is that the two are operating symbiotic, because traditionally the water element will be happening during the day and the entertainment aspect will be happening at the night. And so you've got an extended length of stay for the entire day, and that's not necessarily a new concept. We've seen that with the big theme parks that have built amphitheater entertainment venues next to them and have upsells with ticket shows and stuff like that. But now we're doing it where it's two different accessibility options, right? You don't have to buy a ticket for everything. The general public can come into one or the other and not both, or, kind of changing it up in that regard.
Might be an odd or off the wall question here, but what is the appeal of water that makes it so compelling?
And I can't answer that. All I know is that it is. I've been scuba diving for a long time as well. And so anytime I want to lose my mind and find my soul, I typically go to the ocean. So, but I
I
don't
think you
know.
did pretty well. Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it's that we're comprised of 70% water, in our bodies, and it pulls us to there. Or maybe 70% of our Earth is covered in water. I don't know. I don't know. It's a good question, though.
So one of the things this is switching gears maybe a little bit here, but curious if we can go on your LinkedIn profile. You have the abbreviation CVE or Certified Venue Executive, but curious if you could maybe share what that means and what that is and how one becomes an SVE.
Yeah, absolutely. So the CVE stands for Certified Venue Executive, like you talked about. It's very similar to IAAPA's ICE. Is that the right acronym? Yeah. Um,
ICAE, yeah,
ICAE,
yeah,
IAAPA Certified Attractions
corrections
Executive. Yeah.
executive, yeah.
So it's very similar to that, but it's through an organization called IAVM, which is the International Association of Venue Managers, right? And it's the guys that manage all the arenas and stadiums and performing arts centers and amphitheaters and things like that. And those are the two worlds that I've lived in most of my career. So the only difference is one has, water and rides, and one has concerts and those types of attractions. But they're very, very similar in terms of operation, because they both have facilities that charge a fee to get in. They both have food and beverage. They both have restrooms and maintenance and mechanical and HVAC and, all the rest of it that goes with loading a massive amount of people in and out in a short frame of time. So it's very, very similar type of industries. Just kind of diving into it a little bit, the CVE you have to have had at least 10 years of experience in the top two positions within an organization, right? So the president or vice president or GM or AGM or something like that. You've had to have 10 years of that experience at that level. Um, there's an application process that has to be approved before you can go any further. You have to write about an 8-page essay on whatever topic they assign to you. There's a 250 written exam that is administered. And if you get through all of that, then you have a 2 to 3 hour oral interview with a panel of 3 to 5 senior professionals who currently hold the CVE. And I've seen guys go through the entire thing and not pass the oral interview. So, um, That's what it takes to get the CVE. Similar to, again, the IAPA certification, but I think theirs is a tenure at the top and then a written exam. So it's similar. It's just an executive level designation within an attractions industry association.
Hmm. And so
So
when you, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, to me, what it means really is that you're old, and no, I'm just kidding. But it represents a milestone in my career, right? Of being able to have attained these, not only the letters, but what the letters stand for in terms of experience, the level of experience it takes to get it, the dedication to staying in the career for a long, or that the industry for a long period of time, as well as the validation from your peers as an expert in the field. So that's what CV is.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to ask, kind of along the lines of that experience, you mentioned getting the kind of the honorary MBA in hospitality when you were in Las Vegas. I'm curious if there's any stories or lessons that you got from that time frame that has kind of shaped you and your leadership style even to this day.
Man, we could talk an entire another podcast on the stories from Las Vegas, the playground of LA. But yeah, it was a crazy time because they were turning over staff. They were also expanding the brand. So when I started with that organization, there was plans for 6 additional stores to be built within 3 years over across the country. And Vegas and Orlando are the two flagship House of Blues locations. So they would pull people out of both of those locations to go and train and open and prepare. And having worked at Schlitterbahn when it started, it was about 30 acres. When I left, it was over 70 acres, and then building 2 other facilities, and then renovating amphitheaters. And I renovated the Paramount Theater in Denver, and renovated the Bass Concert Hall in Austin, and all this was leading me up to figuring out how to do Icon, right? Because it's all construction. It's all thinking about things before they're built, and rock and stone and steel and sheetrock and all that, and trying your best to get it right because it's very hard to change it after the fact. Not only they're going to look at you and say, "You said," so we want to make sure we pay attention. But yeah, the House of Blues. I mean, it was just such a fast-paced business, right? We used to joke that every night Saturday night in Vegas because it doesn't matter when you go, as anybody from that's going as a guest to Las Vegas, it's typically your Saturday night, right? You want to go out, you want to play, you want to party, you want to do all this kind of stuff. And so from us, it worked. It was really hard, long hours, which is something we can touch on as well. But um, we opened every day at 7 a.m. and we closed every day at 4 a.m. and we were open 364 days a year. So we were only closed for 3 hours, and that's when you're fitting your maintenance in. So it was an interesting time to run it. So we were opening, and then of course through the transition of Live Nation acquiring House of Blues. So that whole merger happened while we were there. So yeah, lots of experiences and lots of lessons.
So I'm going to ask the same question, but want to go back in time farther to lessons you learned picking up tubes and trash at Schlitterbahn when you were not yet 16 years old.
Number one is that 16 is a magical birthday. But I was very fortunate to work with some really great people at Schlitterbahn. And just, I can throw out a name, Terry Adams, that was just instrumental in my growth. And she continues to be a mentor to this day. Still stay in touch with her. She was one of the first people I invited over to the house when we moved back to Texas. So, um, she just imparted a work ethic, and a pride in your facility and a general what I call ownership mentality, right? Is like you own this park. It's your park. Clean it up. And all the lessons that go after that, right? The cleanliness prevents accidents. It encourages guests to come back. It increases the guest experience, all that kind of stuff. Was it fun? No. Did I work hard? Sometimes, I was a kid, but we had to take trash out. And that's, Josh, that's actually a really cool question because I hadn't really put it together. But one of the things that we always combated at Schlitterbahn, and everybody knows it that has in this industry, there's different names for it, but we called them snail trails or trash trails. And you pull a liner out of a trash can and there's juice, we used to call it Schlitter juice, that flows from the liner and has a line all the way down the sidewalk and over to the trash can or out to the dumpster, right? How do we fix that? Well, those are the kind of things we think about now when we're designing parks, and how do we extricate trash from the park to not let those kind of things happen, or at least minimize that. So, lessons learned along the way, and you just try to keep track of all of them and remind yourself of them and keep moving forward. But it installed a really good work ethic with me. It instilled an aspirational type of a mindset, which is I'm here now, but I'd like to get to there, and then I'd like to get to there, and then I'd like to get to there. So it was a great starting point, and it really made you appreciate, where you've been, or where you are if you know where you've been, and that's walking around a big park just picking up other people's refuse. So
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. I love that story about the Schlitter juice, because I used to be in charge of park services at Valley Fair, and we never called it Schlitter juice. We just called it trash juice or whatever. But
right.
we definitely had that same problem. Um,
Yeah.
but Brian, I've got one last question for you, and I know we're getting close to the end here, but and this might be a little bit of an unfair question because you cover so many industries already with what you do, in terms of events and design and things like that. But if you weren't working in any of those industries, what do you think you'd be doing?
Man, having worked in this or similar industries since I was able to work, I don't know. I would say realistically, probably back in the arenas or stadiums somewhere, because where I find the most joy in what I do is seeing the people's faces that we do it for, right? So the mom or the dad or the kids that come and have a great experience and their smiles are lit up, and like the face of somebody sliding down a slide or in a roller coaster that's just pure joy, right? Or terror, depending on what they feel, but an emotion. And sort of like in the concert world, you may not know the guy standing next to you, but as soon as the lights go down and the band goes up that you're both there to see, all of a sudden you're best friends and you're not thinking about your day at all. We offer that. We collectively, as Attraction Pros, offer that to people, right? We let them live in the moment. They're in a heightened sense of joy. Everything is okay. That's what they walk in with. Then it's up to all of us to maintain that until they leave, right? So probably arenas and stadiums. And if I wasn't doing that, I've always had this little inkling of a dream to have a boutique resort somewhere that I could take people out hiking and fishing and, well, maybe not fishing because I don't really like to fish, but scuba diving, things like that around the water, some nestled on some subtropical place that you could go hiking through the jungle and go scuba diving and relax and just create a sense of joy for somebody. So that's probably what I would be dreaming about while I was working at an arena or stadium somewhere.
Great answer. Great answer.
Do it. Brian, this has been awesome. Also, I want to give just a point here. This is episode 398. If you go back to episode 20, we had an awesome interview with Terry Adams, novice podcast hosts, but great interview, and she was a great guest
How
on the
about
podcast.
that? How about that? That's pretty cool.
In the beginning. So, Brian, as we start to wind this down here, if people wanted to learn more about Icon Leisure Services or get a hold of you directly, where would you send them?
Brian, Brian at Icon LS. That stands for Icon Leisure Services. So iconls.com. Probably the best way to get a hold of me. There's multiple ways to get in touch with me via the website. LinkedIn, we have Icon Leisure LinkedIn site. So that's another way that you could get a hold of us. But those are probably the two best ways at this point.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Brian, thank you so much for your time today. We really do appreciate hearing about all the trash and the tubes and all the design that you're doing now to help our guests and our team members. And for everybody out there who's watching and listening, just remember, we are all Attraction Pros.